everyone, Stephanie Denman here from the Denman Homestead, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about an experience that I've been dealing with as a real estate agent in Texas, but also as a landlord. A lot of you know that aside from the things that we do here on the homestead, I do real estate as well, and we have a few rental properties. So something that we've kind of been dealing with in the background is an eviction, and I have been debating on sharing this with you guys or whoever, this could help potentially, just because it is such a, it's not a really fun topic, but it may help someone out in the future if they know of someone who is going through something similar or have never gone through something like this before, like me. I had never, so I didn't know what to expect. So I just thought I would share with you guys what we've been going through. So Buddy and I own a property, and we had rented it out. And the tenant, back in October, stopped paying rent. So we had worked with our tenant previously about some other payment arrangement situations, and then they just basically ceased communication and stopped paying rent. So we had to basically go through the eviction process for the first time. We've been lucky enough through the years that we've not had to deal with this yet, but here we are, we're dealing with it now. So whenever a tenant stops paying rent, someone's got to still pay the mortgage, right? So Buddy and I cover that mortgage month after month after month. And in the eviction process, it's not a very quick one. So what has to happen is a couple steps. And now let me tell you, I am in Texas, and each state is different, the way they do things. I think even each county within the state is different. So do not take this as legal advice. This is just based on my experience and my experience alone. So please make sure that if you're going through something similar, that you definitely look up the laws and regulations in your specific area. Okay, so tenant stops paying rent, you need to file the eviction process. If I were to go back and do it over again, I would have done this sooner, because I gave this tenant an opportunity a lot longer than I should have to pay the rent, and therefore it's kind of extended the time that the house has remained unpaid for. So I think that's a learning lesson for me, is that the first signs that you see that your tenant is struggling with making rent or paying rent, be very, very clear in your expectations on how you're going to get that rent paid, and put deadlines down, because as much as we want to help and be understanding, we still have a bill to pay, we still have a roof that we need to keep over our heads, so it's a business. That being said, so if your tenant stops paying rent and you need to file the eviction process, for me, what I had to do was I basically had to give something called a pay or quit notice. And that notice is mailed, certified, as well as placed on the door, inside the door or outside the door of the residence. And then you take a picture of it, and you take a picture of the envelope that you've placed on the door, and you take a picture of your certified receipt that was mailed as well, all the proof, and you take a picture of the actual letter of what it states. And basically what it says is pay or quit. You either pay or move out. And you have to tell them pull up your lease agreement from this date to this date, this is what you owe, and then if there are any daily fees that are incurred on top of that, they owe them as well. Normally in your lease, if you're a day late, it's a fee and then plus fees and fees and fees. So just make sure that's all stated on your letter to pay that or to move out. You have to give them 3 days for this notice. Okay, so you give them the notice, You have to wait 3 days before you can even file for an eviction. Okay, you have to give them an opportunity to make it right and to pay, and you have to have proof that you gave them that opportunity. All right, so 3 days goes by, you don't receive the rent. You take that information, you go to your courthouse, your local JP, wherever the house is located. So you don't have to live, wherever you live is not where you file. It's where the house is the jurisdiction of the property. So you go to that local justice of the peace that handles eviction, the eviction court, and you file your paperwork, you show your proof, you make your copies of the notice that you posted. And up to that date, you need to know how much is owed as of the date of filing for the eviction court date, because it's a court date, it's a court hearing. So then you pay a fee, pay a couple $100 to the court so that you can go to court and see a judge. So that's what I paid. I paid a fee to file the eviction. So once that's done, the clerk will give you a court date. Now, for me, it was fairly quick. It was about 3 weeks from the day that I went in there and I filed for it. So it was about 3 weeks later, I had to go into court. It's like December, mid-December by this point, and sit in a courtroom. There's a judge, and that day or that time period that I was there was just eviction court. So I didn't realize that there was something like for just eviction. So you got to hear, basically, they would call the plaintiff and the defendant up to speak with the judge, and they would plead their case of why they couldn't pay rent, or if the judge was going to give them any sort of grace period, or if the judge was going to say, nope, you either pay or you're out. All that is discussed in the courtroom. So when you file for an eviction, when you're there and you file for the paperwork, they give you your court date, but they also send an officer to the property to serve the tenant with court papers stating that you need to appear in person in court for eviction court. They can post it on the door as well if they're not home. So by this time, for us in my situation, by the time that we had posted that 3 days pay or quit notice, and the time that the sheriff went out to give notice of eviction court, he called me and said, hey, it appears that the house has been abandoned. Now, as a landlord, I have a right to enter my property for inspections, any means that I deem necessary. So we went by the house and we took a look, and yes, by all definition, the house was abandoned. There was no furniture. There was a bunch of trash, like a bunch of trash. They had left all of their food from the fridge in the pantry in a trash bag and left it in the middle of the kitchen. So thank goodness we got there when we did, because it didn't have an opportunity to spoil just yet. Plus the electricity had been turned off and the water had been turned off. So that also gave us a pretty good indication that no one was living there. So we had to make several trips with the truck to the dumpsters and got as much trash as we could out of the house. And but before you can change locks or anything, because listen guys, just because the house is abandoned doesn't mean that you can go ahead and relist the house online and get someone else to come and move in, because you have to go through the eviction process. If that tenant were to come back and move back in the house and you didn't follow through with the eviction, there's nothing legally stating that you ever evicted that tenant. You can say, well, you moved out, everything was gone. They could say, well, I was visiting my brother for 2 weeks and I took everything with me and now I'm back. They could come up with any excuse to come back, and then you have to go through this whole process again. So make sure, even if the house is abandoned, you do follow through with the eviction court. So once the sheriff let us know that the house had been abandoned, we went over there, cleaned up. I then went to my eviction court date. My tenant was not there. So she was the defendant, I was the plaintiff, and she didn't show up. That's fine, and I noticed in court that half the time the defendants don't show up. because they're gone. They are not going to pay the rent, and they're done. So she will have an eviction on her record, though, that gets filed with the courts, that she now has an eviction on her record. Because when you pull up a history check, or criminal history check or background check, it'll show that evictions will pop up on your record. So that's how we also determine on who comes to move into our properties, as well as do they have prior evictions. Because if they have a prior eviction, that may be an indicator whether or not we want to accept or reject them as an applicant. So she no-showed for court, and the judge just basically called me up and said, tell me the timelines, tell me what you did, tell me how much is owed up to this date. So I told him everything. He then said, okay, I'm awarding you the possession of property. After 6 days, you can file the writ of possession. It's called writ of possession. W-R-I-T, W-R-I-T, writ of possession. So you have to wait 6 days. There's always a timeline, right? There's like a grace period for everything. So within that 6-day time frame, although he said, yes, you are granted what you're asking for, the back rent money and possession of the property, within that 6-day time frame, she still has an opportunity to make it right with me and pay me the money and not be evicted. I already knew in my mind wasn't going to get the money, and she already moved out. So I waited the 6 days, and I basically went back to the courthouse and I said, the house has been abandoned and I have possession of the property. So they just issued me the writ of possession, and that was that. So I now have possession of the property, and now I can change the locks, and the eviction has been processed. So she's evicted technically. Now, had she not moved out and was still there and didn't pay or work out that 6-day deal, and I needed her to be removed from the property, when I would go to file that possession of writ, the sheriff would go out there, post the notice that she has 24 hours to leave the property, and then I would go out there the next day with the sheriff, and he would remove that person, like take them out of the property, and then it would be up to me to get all of her possessions out of the house, like on the sidewalk. So he said, come with a moving truck, come with some able-bodied people to move furniture if she's still there. So I already knew that she was gone, so I didn't have to worry about that, but that would have been the next step, was that the sheriff would have physically had to remove them from the property after 24 hours of the writ. Thankfully, we didn't have to go that route. That would have been traumatic, I think. So yeah, we're now in the end of January, and so we've been from October to January, and I'm just now able to get it cleaned up and repaired, and now we're going to get it back on the market for a new tenant. Fingers crossed that this new tenant is great. And everyone has a story and everyone has a reason. I remember whenever I was renting back in the day, and just not ready to buy or whatever it may be, as a real estate agent, we hear a lot of stories, and that's the dream, right? Home ownership is the dream. We want to be able to help people realize that dream. And so, we also want to, as a landlord, take care of my tenants so that they help take care of our property, right? We really try to form good relationships, and Johnny on the spot, if they have an issue, really be there for them in hopes that they reciprocate that. But it doesn't always work out that way. And there's a ton of other obstacles that come with being a landlord and being, a renter and property manager and all of that. So this was just one of the instances that we happen to have been dealing with in the background, and I wanted to share that process with you, just to give insight for anyone else who may be thinking about getting a rental properties or might be having to go through this situation in the future. And so that you kind of know what to expect, because I didn't. I also didn't realize how much money it was going to cost me in court to get someone out. I really didn't know. And then the fact that I'm never going to get that rent. There is avenues you can go through in order to file to try to recoup that money. But again, you're facing filing fees and, you know, the options are not great. So one of the options is a garnishment of a bank account, but you have to know the bank account information in order to garnish the wages. And if they close that bank account, then the attorney for the bank can sue me for attorney's costs if I try to garnish a negative account or a closed account. It's really, really strange. So there's that option. Another option is I can file a lien on any property that they may own in any county, but I have to file it in each county, and I have to know if they own property, and it lasts for 10 years. So if I don't know if they own any property, or if they end up buying property in the future, I won't really know that unless I continue to do that research to find out if they're property owners in a specific county around me. It's a lot of legwork and research, and if you know you just don't have someone staying on top of it 24/7 trying to track this person down to get the money. Time is money, right? So is it worth it, or just move on and get you a good tenant and, you know, wash your hands of it? So like I said, chances of you getting your back rent probably really slim. Another thing that I learned is that, you know, those daily fees that I mentioned before, how you have like your initial rent and the back rent that's due, but then the daily fees that incur, those fees are separate. So when the judge asks you how much back rent is owed minus any fees, he only awards you in that eviction court what the rent is, not what the daily fees are, even though it's in the lease contract. So those daily fees, you basically have to sue that person separately for the fees incurred. Yeah. So it makes it kind of difficult on a landlord's, based on like for us, trying to right the wrong here. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, you just move on. And if you want to fight the good fight, fight the good fight. Definitely, that's your right and your options. If that is your right and your options in your location. For me, it was. But again, the reality of it is just like, hey, like, good luck to you, and we'll move on and get another tenant in there. And yeah, so that was my first eviction process in Texas. So it's still not deterring me from ever wanting to be a landlord again. It happens. You know, now I know what to expect if it happens in the future. So it's just one of those things. It's a bump in the road, and we just pick up and keep on going. So thanks for hanging out with me today on my explanation of evictions in Texas. And we will catch you on the next one. Bye, guys.